Good evening. Today is Tuesday, April 4, 2023. The time's 5 p.m. and the regular meeting of the following will come to order. The Victorville City Council and the same council also sitting as the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the City as Housing Assets successor, Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Clerk, will you kindly call the roll?
Councilmember Gomez,
Presente.
Councilmember Harriman,
Here.
Councilmember Irving,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Here.
Mayor Jones.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the introduction to public comments, but before I do that, Madam Clerk, are there requests to speak?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you. With no requests before us, we're going to go ahead and move on to declaration of closed session items by our City Attorney, Mr. DeBortnowski.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. We have one item this evening. It is existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D1. It has settlement discussions related to it. Therefore, disclosure of the case name may jeopardize those discussions. To the extent there is reportable action, we will report it either at the conclusion of the closed session or at the commencement of the regular 6 o'clock session.
All right, thank you. With that said, we're going to recess to closed session. We'll resume open session at 6 p.m.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, CNM, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Just wanted to check if Pastor McBride has shown up.
Good evening. Today is Tuesday, April 4, 2023. The time is 6 p.m. and we're resuming open session of our regular meeting, the following of which will now come to order. The Victorville City Council and the same council also sitting as the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the City is Housing Assets successor, Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Clerk, will you kindly call the roll?
Councilmember Gomez,
Buenas tardes, comunidad.
Member Harriman,
Here.
Councilmember Irving,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Here.
Mayor Jones.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. All right. With that, we're going to move on to our closed session announcements by our City Attorney, Mr. D. Bortnowski.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. We had one item this evening. It was existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D1. And the case name is not on the agenda since it just dealt with settlement discussions. At this time, there is no reportable action with respect to that item.
All right, thank you. With that said, we're going to move on to our invocation. We're going to ask one more time, is Pastor DeAndre McBride with us this evening? Okay, seeing as he's not here, do we have any volunteers behind the dais to lead us in prayer? Then I will be leading us in prayer, and then that'll be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Police Captain John Wickham. So if everyone will please rise if you're able. Heavenly Father, we come before you with thanksgiving in our hearts for this great country that we have, and amidst all the turmoil, there is still greatness. Pray that you will be with us this evening to bind our hearts together as one community, that you will give us wisdom and discernment in the business that this council has to conduct this evening, that you will help us to make wise decisions, knowing what is good and right and honorable for our community. I pray that you would help us to treat others as we would ourselves like to be treated, that we would be servants of your holy name, and that we would only do those things that further your kingdom. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please face the flag and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Captain Wickham. We're now going to move on to a wonderful part of our evening, and that is a proclamation. April is Fair Housing Month. So with that, I'd like to invite Fidel Carranza, Wendy Rami, and Alicia Strother to the front, and if my council member colleagues will join me. stay there, or can we have someone record for you? You okay? All right. All right, I'm so glad you're here. April, as I just said, is Fair Housing Month. And 55 years ago, the Fair Housing Act was signed into law. This landmark civil rights law prohibits discrimination in housing. A diverse, inclusive community is a strong community. And so I'm proud to join with my fellow council members in proclaiming April Fair Housing Month in the city of Victorville. We support the belief that all who reside or seek to reside in the city of Victorville will do so without fear of discrimination or prejudice. Thank you to the High Desert Association of Realtors for helping us to shine a light on this very important issue in our community. And so I'm going to present you with a proclamation, which is our pleasure. And because it's a proclamation, I'm going to read it, because it will help our community. All right, so whereas the Fair Housing Act enacted on April 11, 1968, enshrined into federal law the goal of eliminating racial segregation and ending housing discrimination in the United States. And whereas the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, and disability, and commits recipients of federal funding to affirmatively further fair housing in their communities. And whereas High Desert Association of Realtors is mission and intent of Congress to provide fair and equal housing opportunities for all, and whereas our social fabric, the economy, health, and environment are strengthened in diverse, inclusive communities, and whereas more than 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, discrimination persists and many communities remain segregated. And whereas acts of housing discrimination and barriers to equal housing opportunity are repugnant to a common sense of decency and fairness. Now, therefore, I, Deborah Jones, Mayor of the City of Victorville, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2023 as Fair Housing Month in the City of Victorville, and support the belief that all who reside or seek to reside in our city will do so without fear of discrimination or prejudice. Congratulations. Mr. Carra, would you like to say a few words? Do we have?
My name is Fidel Carranza, and I'm the president of the Association of Realtors. We are 1,300 members locally, but we are 230,000 members statewide. And a couple of years ago, CAR, the California Association of Realtors, adopted fair housing as part of our core standards to remind us what we do. We not only sell homes, but we advocate for fair housing for all. And we thank the City of Victorville for supporting us and proclaiming April as Fair Housing Month. And I'm here with my chair of the Fair Housing Committee, who is going to tell you a little bit about an event that we are putting together for Fair Housing Month.
Hello, everyone. April the 20th is going to be Fair Housing Day. We have Fair Housing Month, so we have Fair Housing Day on that day. It'll be held at the board on Hesperia Street at 9 to 9:30. You need to know your rights. No one knows their rights, so it's a day that you can find out your rights. We're going to have speakers. We have a continental breakfast, and it is free to the public. So help us make history. Know your rights. Come out and visit us on that day. Tell everyone, spread the word.
Now you have to hold on to pictures. No, no. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you. Congratulations
Thank you so
again.
much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to move on to our agenda, and once again, congratulations on April being Fair Housing Month. Madam Clerk, at this time, will you kindly present the agenda and any revisions thereto?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are no revisions to the agenda this evening.
Okay, moving on to conflict of interest declarations. Anyone? Council members? Hearing none, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to the introduction to public comments. Before I do that, Madam Clerk, do we have requests to speak?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Well, everyone, welcome to tonight's meeting of the Victorville City Council. Your City Council is interested in your ideas and opinions and furthermore endeavors to incorporate them into its deliberations. At the same time, the Council must be able to carry out its business in an organized and efficient manner, free from material disruption. Therefore, this meeting will be administered in accordance with the Council's established policies and procedures and Government Code Sections 54957 and 54957.9 and .95. Individuals may speak on agenda items or on issues not posted on the agenda during the public comments section, providing those issues are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Individual speakers may address the Council once per public comment period and once per each public hearing item for up to 3 minutes. All testimony is to be directed solely to the Council. Although open meeting laws do not permit Council members to engage in dialogue with any speaker during the public comment periods, please know your comments and questions may be taken into consideration by Council members when discussing that particular agenda item. The presiding officer may briefly respond or have staff respond to statements or questions, or may request that the staff report to the Council at a subsequent meeting. Speakers are requested to comment as briefly as the subject permits. Individual Council members who speak as a member of the public do so without the semblance or presumption of authority derived from his or her public office and are subject to the same meeting rules of conduct and decorum as other public participants. Once comments are invited, the speaker will be called on by name, then recognized by the presiding officer. The speaker will state the item number or numbers that will be addressed or that the subject is a non-agendized matter. Audience members may not disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of this meeting, and those who do so are subject to removal from the meeting pursuant to Penal Code 403. Your understanding and cooperation are appreciated. Madam Clerk.
Our first speaker is Bassem Sage.
Good evening, sir, and welcome to our meeting. And if you'll kindly speak into the microphone.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Is this
My name is Bassem Sage.
Excuse me, is this a non-agendized matter?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
My name is Bassem Sage. I'm a resident of Apple Valley for 30 years, property owner in Victorville. I've been facing a severe issue on one of my empty lots property on 6th Street. I apologize. On 6th Street and D Street. And where I have a lot of homeless people are residing on the property. And I feel like the city has failed to protect me and protect my property. Yet, I'm getting citation from for code enforcement for people residing on my property that I cannot control. I did everything that I can, to continue cleaning the property until it became a big issue. Where I have mattresses, refrigerators, beds, and tires, you name it. And I continue getting citations by code enforcement, and I feel that it's very unfair. And now I am appealing all these citations, but even though if they go away, I still feel that I need protection from the city, and I need a resolution for the problem. This is just not fair to me that I have to pay for somebody else damaging my property or residing on my property without my consent, which I actually twice in a row, a couple of years, I have signed a trespassing agreement with the city. And I posted signs where they actually tore them down and they refused to leave. They came after me with crowbars, when I approached them. And the code enforcement insists it is my issue, my responsibility, to continue protecting this place and guard it 24/7. For God's sake, there is better things in my life to do than protect an empty property. one of the code enforcement officer asked me to put a wall, block wall, that's going to cost me $20,000, a minimum 20,000, to secure my property from these people. And so I came in here for help. I need help. I need something. I need code enforcement to stop citing me. I have $1,200 worth of citations. First, they blamed it on 2 trees that living on my property. And we're trying to negotiate where I can actually get my own gardener to come out and cut them down for $500. City says, no, we can only do it for $4,000, but we'll help you with the $2,000, half of it. And I say, how fair is that when I only pay $500? Anyway, so the city wound up saying, let's trim the trees, or the code enforcement, and maybe they'll go away. Well, guess what? They didn't go away.
Your time is up.
So
Okay, Mr. Sage,
Yes.
thank you. Hold on just a moment. Mr. Metzler, can I defer to you on this? How would you like this to be handled?
I think at this point, we can take Mr. Bossum's information and call him back, gathering from the speaker that there's an active code case and it's going through the appeal process. There's probably limited things we can speak to at this point until the case is adjudicated. But nonetheless, with respect to the others that aren't going through a legal process, my office can call Mr. Bossum back.
You have the contact information? Or would you?
I believe Heather have all of the information because I came and saw her a couple of days ago. I came actually to see you in the office, but Heather came out.
Okay.
And me and Heather went to code enforcement.
Okay, we'll
We
have
spoke with the
them contact
manager.
you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate your being with us.
Appreciate you too. Thank you. Thank
Mr.
you. for listening.
Sai, Mr. Sai.
All right, Madam Clerk, is there another speaker?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you. All right, with that said, the chair is closing the public comment period and brings the item back to the council. We're now going to move on to our first business in order, which is our consent calendar. Items number 1 through 5. So at this time, a motion is in order for the council and the council acting on its various boards of directors to approve action in accordance with the recommendation posted on the agenda for items 1 through 5.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Who seconded the item, Madam Mayor? Thank you. Councilmember Gomez?
Yes.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra? Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. All right, we're going to now move on to item number 6. This is the approval of final tract map number 20560. Mr. Metzler, will you kindly introduce the item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This item involves the mapping of property, taking real property from the tentative mapping stage and bringing it to a final stage. The site is generally bounded on the south by Bear Valley Road, on the west by 3rd Avenue, and then on the east by 2nd Avenue. And effectively, just as these types of tentative tracts typically go through the process involving the Planning Commission, where there are conditions of approval attached to be satisfied prior to recordation. In this particular case, the conditions have been satisfied. In fact, 2 sites within this map are actually underdeveloped. I believe there is a gas station and a McDonald's being located within this subdivision. But altogether with the recordation, this will turn the subject site into 18 recorded lots that based upon the Planning Commission entitlement that it's now in place, will accommodate a much larger mixed-use development that will include multifamily, commercial, and office type uses. So with that, the author on this item is your city engineer, Mr. Brian Gangler. He's available for any technical questions or comments you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Clerk, the recommendation, please.
That the Honorable City Council approve final tract map number 20560. Approve the subdivision improvement agreement between the subdividers, Bear Valley Development Company LLC and Bear Valley Road and 2nd Avenue LLC, and the city and accept bonds and cash as security for the public improvements for the subdividers.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to technical questions for clarification as it relates to the staff report. We're going to begin with you, Member Gomez.
Will the Victorville Connect be a project that perhaps may be funded with any kind of ARPA funds or housing fundings for affordability? And clarity would be required. I don't believe it's the case, but I don't know if that is.
Relating to this particular item, the answer is no. As it currently stands, this project is being proposed and planned entirely as a private project.
Okay. And do we know when the conditional use permit expires, if there is one in place?
The conditional use permit, this is not dealing with a conditional use permit. This is just dealing with the recordation of the map. If there's a CUP affecting the property, I'm sorry, it's very likely that it's affecting the two that are under development right now. Mr. Webb, can you help me out a little bit? Is there is there a CUP or is everything that's actually contemplated just permitted uses at this point?
There is at least one conditional use permit for the gas station that's on one of the properties, but the entitlement is for 3 years, and then they have active building permits, so that will go beyond that 3-year initial period. So there's no issue with expiration.
As it relates to the residual, minus the gas station, minus the McDonald's, are there any CUPs affecting the remainder of the property?
No, that was approved as a plan unit development, which does not have any conditions.
So if I understood correctly, there is one CUP attached, but when you made a statement about the PUD, it made it seem like it was an override. I'm just seeking clarification on the last two.
Thank you. The plan unit development does not have a sunset date. It is essentially the new zoning ordinance for that property. So as long as they follow the PUD standards, they can continue to build the project.
Okay, thank you. Is this a federal project? And if so, do we have any oversight from state or anything that would be afforded that we should know about that is not presented within the agenda item?
At this point, it's entirely private. It's not a federal project.
Thank you. That's the end of the, well, if it's not a federal project, then it wouldn't go with any kind of wages and union type of labors or Bacon Act, correct?
The union wages part, that's something I can't speak to, largely because that could involve a private party transaction involving the developer, contractor, and the labor they choose. That's outside of our control. But with respect to prevailing wage Davis-Bacon, because it's not a public project at this point, it's not expected that those would apply.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Harriman.
I have none.
Thank you, Member Irving.
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
None, ma'am.
Thank you, and the chair has none and invites a motion.
Move to approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. To adopt it? Yes. Thank you. We have a first and a second discussion on the pending motion, beginning with Mayor Pro Tem.
No.
Thank you. Member Harriman.
No.
Member Gomez.
The moment.
Thank you. Member Irving.
None, thank you.
Thank you, and the chair has no discussion. Closes the discussion period. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez?
Yes.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, moving on to our next item in written communications, item number 7, Air Traffic Control Equipment Upgrade Project, number CC23-041. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Out at the airport, we've made good out of a lot of the resources that we've inherited from the military base as a function of its closure. And we've operated since 1996 as a public airport with a air traffic control tower helping manage the airspace that surrounds our airfield. And largely since that time, we've been relying on what we would characterize as aged traffic control equipment dating back to the 1970s. And we've basically been doing everything we can to Band-Aid that system to keep it operable. We were fortunate very recently, and having resulted from the 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to be able to receive FAA grant money to help rebuild this system with newer equipment. And so with that, this item particularly is creating a revenue appropriation and an expense appropriation to allow for the funding of polyfrequency radio transmitters, receivers, antennas, voice recording equipment, and wind sensors, which are largely essential to help us keep the air traffic control tower functioning. So with that, the larger detail has been can be answered by Mr. Eric Ray, who's your airport director and the author of this staff report.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, the recommendation, please.
That the Southern California Logistics Airport Authority Board of Directors ratify the acceptance of grant agreement 3-06-0359-031-2022 between the United States of America, acting through the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Southern California Logistics Airport Authority in the amount of $300,000 in support of the Air Traffic Control Tower Equipment Upgrade Project CC 23-041. Adopt resolution number SCLAA 23-004, increasing budgeted grant revenues by $300,000 and increasing budgeted grant expenditures by $300,000, and approve the purchase of equipment in support of Air Traffic Control Equipment Upgrade Project CC 23-041 in the amount not to exceed $300,000.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to questions for clarification as to the staff report, beginning with you, Member Harriman.
I have none.
Thank you, Member Irving.
No, I don't have any questions. This was a well-written report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
None, thank you. Agreeing with Member Irving.
Thank you, and Member Gomez.
So to increase the grant is to accept the increase based on standard procedures. I need clarity on that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. So with the award from the FAA of these funds, and the funds that we're speaking of is an award amount of $300,000. When we prepared the budget, we did not anticipate this award and so forth, and therefore we did not accordingly budget on the revenue side and on the expense side the receipt of these revenues and the ultimate expenditure of these revenues. And so as your question is speaking to the fiscal impact section of this staff report, that's effectively what we're doing in this particular case. Now that the grant has been awarded, we actually have to create accounting entries to treat the expectation of revenue coming in and then also the expenditure going out.
Okay, is the 300,000 increase a one-time on the item, or is that something monthly, annual as an increase?
It's a one-time payment from FAA to the airport authority.
Thank you. And is the agenda budget a review that already is incorporated with the $300,000, or will this memorialize this after its approval?
With the approval of this item, this will memorialize the accounting entries that need to take place to address the revenue receipt and the ultimate expenditure.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez. And the chair has no questions on this and invites a motion from the SCLA Board of Directors. Is there a motion to
Madam
adopt?
Mayor,
Yes.
I move to adopt staff's recommendations.
Thank you. We have a first. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. Moving on to discussion on the pending motion. Member Irving.
No discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Harriman.
No discussion.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
At the moment.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Welcome.
Mr. Ray, congratulations to you and your staff on obtaining this grant. Thank you.
Thank you, and I echo that sentiment. Job well done. It's always nice to have grants come in that help us do good things for our community. All right, with that said, the discussion period is now closed. Madam Clerk, will you please take the vote?
Councilmember Gomez?
Yes.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra? Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. So the SCLA Board of Directors has taken action to adopt the recommendation of staff as presented on the agenda. Moving on to item number 8, this is the purchase and sell agreement by and between the City of Victorville and the Southern California Logistics Airport Authority. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. As we proceed in ultimately starting with the conceptual design work associated with the ultimate police station / public safety facility, one of the things that we have to do to ultimately accommodate the build out of that facility is perfect the ownership of the property, and the preferred site, which is just across the street from City Hall here, is actually vested in the name of the airport authority. And so one of the things that we have to do to perfect ownership so that the project can be built as the city on city-owned property is ultimately sell the subject site to the city. Now, the sale of this property to the city is something that has been contemplated for many, many years. You may recall dating back to 2007-ish when the property was originally acquired and intended to support then an envisioned library project. The property was used relying on SCLA bond proceeds effectively to secure that property. That library project never happened. Life evolved on our end to where we've identified a different purpose for that property. But with that being said, the property has ultimately been in the airport authority's control and ownership. And so with that, the transaction here is intended to respect the original transaction, which is basically to reimburse the airport authority for the money that it paid in originally having acquired the property. So this will be ultimately a sale by the airport authority to the city of Victorville. So with that, this item's co-authored by myself and the airport director, Mr. Eric Ray. He and I both are available for any questions or comments you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Clerk, will you please read the recommendation?
That your Honorable City Council and Southern California Logistics Airport Authority Board of Directors approve resolution number SCLA 23-005, declaring the 8 lots located along Civic Drive as exempt surplus land pursuant to the Surplus Land Act, Government Code Section 54221F1D, and authorizing the disposition of such real property to the city, authorizing the transmittal of a certified copy of the resolution to the Housing and Community Development Department as specified in Section 400E of the Surplus Land Act guidelines, and authorize the Executive Director to execute transactional documents to effectuate the purchase and transfer of the property. Resolution number 23-021, approving the purchase of 8 lots located along Civic Drive, and authorizing the city manager to execute transactional documents to effectuate the purchase and transfer of the property, and resolution number SCLAA 23-006, amending the SCLAA annual budget for fiscal year 2022-2023 to recognize the sale proceeds.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to technical questions for clarification, we're going to begin this time with Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, excuse me, Member Irving.
I don't have any questions. I kind of recall the conversation about these parcels of land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
I have to agree with Member Irving. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
Yes, how fiscally prudent is the city when it uses exempt surplus land for SCLA on 8 lots that are on Civic Drive?
Well, I would say, as it relates to the Surplus Land Act, that really has nothing to do with fiscal prudence in the sense that this is more of a statutorily set framework where California created some new laws effectively to, in the quest of trying to encourage and promote more affordable housing. The Surplus Land Act creates a process where prior to the disposition of public property, there has to be an evaluation of the site and a determination to be made to where the property is not to be best served by affordable housing. So that is much different than the question over fiscal prudence. I think the fiscal prudence question, if you wanted to try to ask something on that regard, has more to do with the fiscal impact element of this staff report, which is effectively selling the property for ultimately what was originally paid for the property. So with that being said, I think it is a fiscally prudent transaction.
Okay, so with your response, then I'm looking at the map in color. So just before page 205. So we're saying that these 8 lots would not be conducive in any regard to zone them for any type of residence, but instead for maybe a commercial?
No, it's better served and intended for a public purpose, public building, which is compatible with the surrounding. You have public buildings immediately adjacent to, so it fits with the immediate surrounding uses.
Okay, so public housing would not be amenable, in other words?
No.
Okay. After 1.9 is expended from the ARPA funds, how much would be left? So I'm supposing that we're using some of the ARPA funding for this.
This particular item, yes, is relying on ARPA funding. Let's see if it's not in the staff report. We do track cash flow of our ARPA funds. I just don't have that available at this time. That's something that we'll have to follow up separately with you on.
All right, and the next question is, how are these funds, the ARPA funds and the off-airport funds, associated with any type of fiscal health? And mind you, this is because I didn't understand that the surplus that we're talking about is not dealing with the fiscal aspect. It was dealing with the type of zoning. So I'm just going to keep my question in play as I have.
So yeah, just to be clear, the ARPA funds are city-controlled funds. Those will be the funds that the city actually use to pay for the property. As the airport authority, a separate enterprise from the city, collects those funds once escrow closes, then it's the airport authority would deposit those monies into its funds, and very likely it'll be the off-airport fund.
Okay, thank you. And does and I'm going to call this commingling of ARPA funds and SCLA funds how does it affect council policy CP 1104? And what makes the difference between both council policy that I just stated with CP 1502 in terms of its expansion?
Well, first, let me try to be clear. There is no commingling of funds. This is funds of the city being used to buy an asset. The airport authority is relinquishing that asset in exchange for money. So there's no commingling of funds. And just to be correct, because I was somewhat uncertain, well, it could have sounded uncertain in my comment about where the funds will be deposited, but they in fact will be deposited into the off-airport fund. And so with respect to the council policy question, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. If you can repeat that again.
Yes, so in terms of these two policies, one of them seems to be override another one with the term of expansion. So I was just wondering how is that, how does it fit one but not the other? I guess we had an option to go with one versus the other for number CP 1104 and council policy number CP 1502. In my reading of the report is we're choosing one over another. So I was just wanting clarification.
No, and that really doesn't have anything directly to do with the physical transaction involving the buy and the sell. The paragraph that you're reading is on page 200 of the staff report, and that was helping explain the larger history that involves this property, how it was acquired, how an interfund loan was put in place based upon audit recommendations of the past. And so we had a couple of policies dealing with a couple of periods of time where interfund loans were necessary, but that doesn't have any real bearing on the physical act that's before this council tonight, because in fact the interfund loans ultimately had been satisfied. There are no more interfund loans affecting this property.
Thank you. And from what agency is the land being transferred from? You can see that on
Your time is up.
207, section 2.
Thank you. So, Mr. Metzler, to the degree that you understood the question, please feel free.
It's being transferred from the airport, I'm sorry, from the city to the airport. I'm sorry, from the airport authority to the city, I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right, and the chair has no questions and invites a motion from the Victorville City Council and the SCLA Board of Directors. Is there a motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt staff's recommendation for the sale.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. Moving on to discussion on the pending motion. Mayor Pro Tem.
No discussion, thank you.
Thank you, Member Harriman.
No discussion.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
Would you repeat your question?
Any discussion on the pending motion?
Oh, yes. Maybe consider it for a different purpose is what I would suggest. That's just part of my comment. Thank you.
Sure. And Member Irving.
No discussion, thank you.
Thank you. And the chair has none and closes the discussion period. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez,
No?
Councilmember Harriman,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Yes.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
Thank you. So the City Council and the SCLA Board of Directors has taken action to adopt the staff's recommendation as posted on the agenda. Moving on now to item number 9. This is the acquisition and installation of automatic license plate reader cameras. Mr. Metzler, will you tee up the item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This item is expanding on investments we've already made to date with our ALPR program, which for those that don't know the acronym, that's our automatic license plate reader system. And since 2019, we've invested in building and expanding this system to what it is currently, which is 107 cameras. Those cameras have been hugely instrumental and helpful to us in actually helping solve crime much more quickly. And in fact, just in the 21 and 22 calendar years alone, we've had close to 400 arrests directly related to the camera system. So they've proven to be hugely successful for us. As we consider this item, which is dealing with 16 additional units to be installed on traffic signals, the delay, if there is a delay in this item coming to you, has more to do with efforts we had to put into trying to coordinate with Caltrans, because originally our original plan was to develop a ring system and basically try to box the city in along its jurisdictional boundaries, because some of our boundaries touch Caltrans right away. It did take us some time to try to work with Caltrans to the point where we ultimately gave up working with them because they were they weren't as cooperative as we were hoping. That being said, we've identified close enough locations where it's going to be able to accomplish the same goal, and so this item is going to be adding what we believe are going to be the last of the ALPRs necessary, an additional 16. We do envision investing in ALPRs in a different way going forward now that we should effectively have a ring around the city built in to give us the results that we need in terms of tracking down crooks and criminals. And we can talk about that likely at budgeting session when we start budgeting additional funds for that. But getting back to this item, this is dealing specifically with just the addition of the remaining 16 that completes our phase program.
All right. Thank you very much. And Madam Clerk, the recommendation, please.
That your honorable city council approve the purchase of 16 fixed license plate reader cameras in the amount of $177,868.60 from Vigilant Solutions LLC. Approve the enterprise services agreement for the automatic license plate reader program services for 1 year. Approve a construction agreement in an amount not to exceed $23,920 with Unex LLC for the installation of said 16 cameras, and authorize the city manager to execute said ESA and construction agreement and any transactional related documents to effectuate this transaction.
All right, very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, we're going to move on to questions for clarification as it relates to the staff report. We're going to begin with Mayor Pro Tem.
Just to the police chief, congratulations to you and your guys on what you're doing. Stay safe. Good work.
Thank you. Member Gomez.
In terms of intra-agency, is the data going to be shared with neighboring cities or any other cities? Just wondering.
The data that we collect is not shared with other cities. The repository, if you will, of data is actually collected in one singular system. Those cities throughout the county that have invested in the same type of technology as us, their data effectively would be shared in that system, but there's no physical sharing or exchanging outside of the system. And so effectively, when, say, a vehicle, for example, goes through an intersection, if data was input on, say, a vehicle that was associated with a crime and it occurred in Highland, for example, and it's running through signals that have cameras here in Victorville, it's that type of information sharing that helps trigger the alert in Victorville. So it's all integrated in a system, but there's no physical sharing outside of the electronic system.
Okay, and how long is the data to be stored? Minimum, maximum? Do we have figures?
I don't know that information. I don't see Tony. Captain Wickham, are you familiar with that enough?
Madam Mayor, Council, good evening. To my knowledge, that data is retained within the system, and for investigative purposes, our agency and any other agencies can enter information or descriptions to see if it aids in the investigation.
So we don't have a time period?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Will the public have access to its data fully, with exceptions of any prohibitions of law through California Public Records?
I'm not familiar with the. I'd have to check on that. I don't know the public records element of it well enough. I do know that we contract with a third party and they're responsible for maintaining all the records. Captain Wickham, are you familiar with any of the records retention?
No, sir, I am not.
Thank you. Are there any clauses protecting any type of potential abuse that may connect to systems that go beyond the alleged quote unquote preventing crime and being proactive? Do we know of that?
What you're describing sounds like a criminal act. I don't know the exact codes that actually would be pursued by law enforcement. Perhaps Captain Wickham knows.
Well, no, let me rephrase. So deputies will have access, and these access could potentially be abused in terms of seeking information that may not be rendered through an investigation. So I was just wondering if we have clause to protect any type of internal abuse from people that do have the authority to access and pass it on to someone else to have their own personal way. I mean, we're all human beings. That's what I'm trying to get to.
So I would suspect no different than here at the city, to the extent that there's inappropriate use or use for personal purposes outside of the scope of the job or the responsibility. We certainly have policies in place to deal with those types of violations.
Okay, so the city, but we can't speak on behalf of the law enforcement or the admin.
The county sheriff does as well.
Okay. So how many square feet is being covered by the current installation of the cameras that we do have?
We don't measure on a square foot basis, because if you can imagine our city boundary, our jurisdiction is about 75 square miles, so a pretty large geographic area. We measure them unitarily based upon the number of cameras affixed to actual signals, which is currently 107, going to 123.
Okay, thank you. And you said it was the end of the phase, but you added a little bit of doubt. Do we know for certain that the ALPR program is definitively over in terms of adding the cameras, or that's not definitive?
So right now, we believe the system as laid out satisfies what we had intended to accomplish using our traffic signals. But there are visions to use different types of means to affix these cameras too, so we can actually get better results. Saying it differently, We have already outfitted an unmarked vehicle with ALPRs affixed to them. When we originally set this out, we had envisioned some kind of outside of the box thinking with respect to affixing these things to, say, street sweepers, so we can actually get into the neighborhoods to be able to identify vehicles that are actually deeper into the neighborhoods, as opposed to just running through traffic signals in the town.
Thank you. Are we utilizing general funds at all that we know of?
At this point in time, we've largely been relying on the AB 3229 monies to fund.
So no GF, general fund?
I'm not recalling previous phases. Previous phases, if they weren't using 3229 money, they were likely using Measure P money, unless you can recall differently, Captain.
For all these cameras and our projects related to this, we use the AB 3229.
Okay, and what's the unit cost per one of these cameras? Just one? No installation, just the cost.
Oh.
Do we know?
Yeah, it looks like they're actually, you might find it starting on page 228, because we did include the actual detail. And so if I'm just looking at this quickly, but it looks like the 16 that we're talking about, they're about $64.95, almost $6,500 a piece, just for the hardware component of the camera.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Metzler, if I might, page 237 and 238 of the attachment, which is attachment B, deals with ownership of data and retention.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, Mr. Harriman. Member Harriman, pardon me.
I have no questions. I've already discussed it in length with the city manager.
Thank you, Member Irving.
I do have a question that's come up during the conversation, and sort of Member Gomez touched on it. So to make sure that I'm trekking the course of this conversation, it sounds like even though we're at our last phase, there's a possibility in the future we could add additional cameras to, as you said, put a ring around the community or the city. Is that correct?
I would say at this point, with these 16 cameras, we'll have a good solid ring around the community where the entrances and exits. And when I say ring, that was really what we were trying to accomplish, is get a good basis for the entryways and exitways into and out of the city. So I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on the entrances and exits to the city.
Okay, well, that leads me to my last question, which was my initial question. What might, according to the report, unless council indicates otherwise, what might staff envision that you might bring a recommendation back to council for its consideration to expand or add another phase to the program?
At this point, we would probably use the budget workshop and the upcoming budget hearing process to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the soonest.
Okay, we're going to settle it there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Irving. And I just have one question. So with the purchase of the 16, that puts us at 120 in total. Since this is phase 6, we've done this 5 times before. 123, okay. All right, that's all I had. And at this point, the chair invites a motion from the council.
Motion to adopt staff's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. Discussion on the pending motion. Mayor Pro Tem.
No discussion.
Thank you. Member Harriman.
I'm excited to see these on our street cleaners and maybe code enforcement trucks.
Possibly.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Member Gomez.
No, thank you.
Thank you. And Member Irving.
No, ma'am. Thank you. We don't have any.
Thank you. And so just to be clear, that this purchase isn't for that yet, but that may come, and that might be a part of our next budgeting discussion or at some point in the future. All right, so again, thank you for a comprehensive report. We've been through this 5 times before, so I would hope that we have a good understanding about how they work and the benefits being provided to our community for sure. With that said, the chair is going to close the discussion period. Madam Clerk, please take the vote.
Councilmember Gomez?
No.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
thank you. So the council has taken action to adopt staff's recommendation as presented on the agenda. Moving now to item number 10. This is initiative number 21-0042A1. This is the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This is an item that we've been tracking at the League of California Cities and then also at our division meeting level for the Mountain Desert Division of the League of California Cities. And this is something involving an initiative that was circulated by a self-proclaimed nonprofit, nonpartisan group, apparently representing the largest of employers in the state of California. And this effectively is an initiative that has qualified for the November 2024 ballot. And effectively is an initiative that we as cities, we as Victorville, I'll speak on Victorville's behalf, believe is effectively an attack on our ability to raise the revenues necessary to help provide the essential public services. And we've identified, very generally speaking, based upon our interpretation of its of what's out currently on this matter, it has the potential to affect things such as the DIF fees that we just approved, along with the user fees that we just approved last year and that went into effect this January 1st. So it's a measure that we're tracking. It's a measure that concerns us. The league has been urging all cities to evaluate it and take action. And at this point in time, based upon our review, we believe this is a measure that could be damaging to Victorville. We're also, if the council approves this tonight, this is something that we can speak to and share our concerns next week as we participate in legislative days up in Sacramento. So with that, I'm the author on this item, but I did have a lot of help by my assistant to the city manager, Mr. Tony Camargo. We'll answer any questions or comments you might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Clerk, the recommendation.
That your honorable city council adopt resolution number 23-022, opposing initiative number 21-0042A1, the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, authorize the execution of the letter to the League of California Cities formally opposing the initiative by the city manager, and authorize copies of the executed resolution number 23-0022 and opposition letter to the League of California Cities.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. We're now going to move on to technical questions for clarification. Before I do that, I want to offer a gentle reminder to all of my colleagues, and that of course includes me, to make sure that we're staying focused on the actual intent of the agenda item. Sometimes when we focus on some of the adjunctive details, it moves us into a completely different direction than the intent of the item. So with that said, we are going to move on to technical questions for clarification. And we'll begin with Member Gomez.
To a degree, is this conceptually a stripping of local control?
It definitely, I would characterize it as that. It's definitely affecting our ability to preserve local control, especially when you handcuff cities and take its revenue generating abilities away.
Would you please expand on the increases of legal defenses costs? Because I know that was one of the issues that it was a problem, you know, it would increase legal defense costs. I was just not understanding what types of costs would be increased because of this item.
Where are you seeing that? Or
So there's like a little list and it talks about like some of the dangers, like types of taxes that would be invalidated, annexation, interference with local control. So I wanted to have like some examples to further understand why some of these points are forewarned for us to approve these measures, this letter, because how will it increase legal defense and how will it invalidate like the taxes? You give a couple of examples, and how would that interfere with local control? So it says major examples of affected fees and charges are, and then it goes through a litany list.
So, yeah, so I'm tracking where you're coming from now, and where you're speaking to, it appears as the top of page 254. And I think the biggest caveat there is that the context of that paragraph is really speaking to, and maybe it should even be underlined, is that if the measure is actually passed by the voters in 2024, we would have certainly concerns as a city, and I don't think we would be the only one, to where I would, when we wrote this statement, we certainly imagined that you would want to do something to challenge the validity, perhaps even the constitutionality of such an initiative when it takes away, has a very direct impact on our fiscal ability. So I think that's where that comment in there, speaking to increasing legal defense costs, is that I think we would have a responsibility to try to defend the taking of those monies. But the big presumption there is if the initiative is passed, which at this point in time, it is not. It's qualified for the 2024 ballot. And so the reason why in this particular item we've identified no fiscal impact is we're effectively, with a position tonight, we'll be relying on not only our legislative efforts, but we'll also be able to have the League of California Cities help support our effort.
Okay, and my other question was also, how would it affect code enforcement? I thought we had Measure P to kind of secure that aspect, so I'm not understanding how that would be an interference.
Well, I think the first item that comes to mind is with respect to the act of code enforcement when they actually issue fines and citations. We can't just arbitrarily set values associated with fines and citations. And in fact, the process that we went through was that very long and exhaustive process that we brought before the council, I think late last summer, where we were adopting effectively the user fees. And so with that, the fees that we actually charge under code enforcement, if they're in the form of citations, those actually have to be studied and determined based upon an actual cost of the service. So that's how it could potentially affect code enforcement, because code enforcement budgets for those types of monies as revenues as a part of our annual budgeting process.
Okay, and when we speak about these, and you kind of touched on it, administratively impacted fees and penalties, are those discretionary, or did you say there's a process of actual cost that we go through to be able to incur what we're going to charge?
Well, to the extent the monies are collected and deposited in the general fund, which I believe they are, the general fund is your discretionary fund that we actually budget on an actual basis. But the other part of your question was somewhat separately related, and we do have to go through an actual fee study, for lack of better terms in this case, which analyzes the costs of the service arriving at those particular fees.
Okay, and then finally, it does have the name of taxpayer protection and government accountability, which is something that I would have not thought from your angle. So how, I don't know if I was just tricked or I'm just putting other frameworks. How does that play into?
So that's exactly what the authors of this initiative are trying to do. They're trying to trick you with exactly that, because most people, especially when we get to the ballots, we look at the head, the title of the actual measure, and perhaps don't look too much more deeply into it. And so that is, in fact, the authors using the title to try to make it sound like a good thing. But when you actually get into the measure analysis or the bill analysis, as the case might be, certainly the fine language of it says something differently.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez. Member Harriman.
I have none.
Thank you, Member Irving.
Yes, Mr. Metzler, if you don't mind elaborating, you touched on something regarding, or maybe it was Member Gomez. It's in terms of due process under existing law. How does this initiative, if it's enacted, how does it augment due process under existing law?
They're actually trying to make the process even stricter than it already is. And so we do effectively have Prop 13 and probably more applicable to the work that we do. Prop 218 is effectively the provisions that we have to adhere to when it comes to the due process, if you will, to make sure that we're not creating fees or revenues just based upon imagination. We have to go through an analysis, but we also have to involve a public process.
Right.
Certain types of revenues require certain different types of thresholds. Whether, for example, when we did the tax measure, in the case of the general tax, it required 50% of the population. Special tax requires 2/3. I think, in the simplest sense, our read of this current initiative actually makes some of those thresholds more difficult for council to act and actually impose revenue, fees that generate revenues to satisfy the services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Irving. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. Thank you. And just one, and I believe I know the answer, but I think it's worth saying. So just going back to Prop 218, we do all that analysis because we in fact cannot just arbitrarily charge anything. We can't make a profit per se, right?
That is correct.
On those services. All right. With that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to putting a motion forward. Anyone?
Motion to approve staff's
Adopt.
Thank you. We have a first. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to discussion on the pending motion. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. Member Harriman.
No.
Thank you. Member Gomez.
At the moment.
Thank you. Member Irving.
No, ma'am.
Thank you. And the chair has none. And the chair closes the discussion period. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez,
No.
Councilmember Harriman,
Yes.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Yes.
Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to item number 11. This is the observance calendar proposal. Mr. Metzler, will you introduce the item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. The city has had a tradition of supporting diversity and inclusion within our city and providing recognitions as much as it could possible to celebrate publicly days of celebration that connect with the city. However, we've largely done it, I would characterize more or less on a reactive basis as opposed to a proactive basis. And so as we have made recognitions in the past, one of the things that we had actually represented to this council previously, and I certainly appreciate all of your support and feedback getting to this point, is we had advised, given the interest in continuing this, that it would be helpful for us from a staff perspective so that we can better manage the workload associated with however big or small this program is. Certainly attaching it to a calendar makes it easier for us to manage so that we can just start pre-programming days of celebration or days of recognition. So we actually put a considerable amount of thought into this item to where we tried to identify using 5 different categories, and those 5 different categories being the types of celebrations or recognitions that we would offer. But with that, actually putting it to a calendar and then being able to just regularly manage it from that perspective. So with that, the author on this item is your Public Information Officer, Ms. Sue Jones, and she's available along with myself to answer any questions or comments you might have.
All right, thank you. So, Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask you to read the recommendation and also ask you if you can get IT up here. I've lost my screen a little while ago.
Okay. I'll take care of that for you. Any action is at the discretion of the City Council.
Thank you. All right, can we just pause a moment because I really would like to see, I need the chart on my screen. Yeah, it's Liz Becerra too.
using it, but yeah. Just try closing. Yeah, that might work. Closing and opening might work. Let me see here. Yeah, closing and an opening worked for me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Yes, thank you to our team as well. All right, so with that said, we're going to get into questions on this, and we'll begin with Member Harriman.
I have none.
Thank you. Member Irving?
I don't have any questions. This is a very comprehensive calendar and I really like it. So no, I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
For once, we're not going to agree. This is a very comprehensive calendar, but
Can you speak into the
I
microphone, please?
think if we adopt it, we're asking for trouble. Groundhog Day isn't on here. National Hug Your News Person Day isn't on here. And you see where I'm going with this. I mean, we're joking and everything, but if something is missed and someone gets offended by it, well, why didn't, National Wear Your Black Sweater to Work Day? And, like I said, Groundhog Day. Today is National Hug Your News Person Day. I think if we leave it at national holidays and national recognitions, then we have a status quo in front of us. That's it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
And again, I apologize to Mrs. Jones. I didn't, that Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sue Jones, our PIO officer, I'm sorry. Sue Jones, our PIO officer. You probably put a lot of hours into this. I apologize. Mr. Metzler, those are just my thoughts. Those are just my feelings. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, Member Gomez.
Yes, my question is what birthed the observation calendar and how does it differ from the former calendar if one existed?
One did not exist. And so that's effectively what we were trying to accomplish here. And one of the things that we were trying to overcome by putting it on a calendar is when, well, and backing up a little bit, in many occasions, we would actually rely on the council to ask for an item to be agendized and then have the council decide if we wanted to celebrate a certain recognition, domestic violence month, or what have you. And we did. Sometimes doing that from a workload perspective came at not the most opportune times. Say, for example, when we're in the middle of trying to put together State of the City. It puts us in a fairly mad scramble sometimes, and obviously we're good soldiers, and we're gonna do as directed and accomplish the goal in that particular case. But because we started seeing that occurring, that's when the concept started developing from my perspective, and I started speaking to you and also sharing that thought with you that if we're going to continue to do this, which we as staff embrace, we'd like to do it in a more managed perspective so that we can develop the program, develop it in such a way where it's easier to manage. We already know in advance what to plan for and how to attend to it, and we can effectively sign it to a staff person, perhaps even to manage. So really, this has been kind of an evolution, if you will, taking it from the onesies and twosie requests to recognize whatever the event might be, and just to develop and make it more formal.
And was there a committee, or how did you create the offering of recognitions, or how was it compiled? I just want to understand that aspect.
So, yeah, we first started, and I'll allow Ms. Jones to expand where I leave some blanks, but we first started based upon what we had already been asked to recognize. From there, we then tried to evaluate what we knew about the community, and tried and included recognitions based upon what we thought our community connected with. We certainly reached out to you as the council and asked for feedback as well, and we took that feedback and we included it. Is there anything else, Ms. Jones, that I may have missed?
I think the only thing that we added was the recognition of municipal professions. That was something that had been done spotty, like we have Public Works Week that is a big celebration that we have. So we just went ahead and put several different municipal professions in here. I think that was an addition that I would add. Yeah.
And then my next question was, when I read the report, it seemed like it was based for the employees, but as I hear the presentation, it's not distinctively for employees. It's something more cultural for a community. Is that so?
I would agree with that. We broke it down into categories that weren't employee centric. Those categories are actually identified on page 284 of the staff report, but just for the benefit of those that don't have the staff report in front of them, those categories we kind of lump things into are first local, state, and national holidays, then separately celebrations of diversity and inclusion, the municipal and public service appreciation, as Ms. Jones mentioned. The promotion of a healthy community was another category that we thought was important, along with recognizing ethnic heritage.
Thank you. And then finally, if I'm looking at one, would September 16th is something also that is very grandiose for Hispanic community in terms of September 16th. And it's in Spanish. It's called El Grito de Independencia. And is there any way to consider, I mean, even if it were or weren't to pass, I'm not saying that you missed it, it's just since we have over 50% Hispanics, and that's a big celebration, and not everybody is well aware because we have different ways of celebrating our culture. And is there any way that we would have even considered that as I'm speaking now?
I believe what you're speaking of, that's the Mexican Independence Day, if I'm correct.
Yes.
I'm scrolling through that. Did we not include that? And if we did not, I guess the answer would be that's completely at the discretion of the council at this point in time.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, again, talking about the comprehensive nature of this, it is, and it's been many, many, many months when at one time or another, members of this council requested to recognize certain month as this or that, and the council was happy to oblige. In councils prior, Mr. Metzler, correct me if I'm wrong, the councils had always taken the approach that we celebrate our inclusion and diversity through our events like the Fall Festival, other kinds of activities in the city, programming, and our policy setting.
I would say that's certainly how we started, yes.
Right. And so when the council and rightly, as things were brought to us, we approved them. I think one of them was Black History Month. That was quite beautiful. There was one for Autism Awareness Month. I think the city manager put on, I think it was Pride Month, and within your prerogative to do that. And so from that, I can tell you, Mr. Metzler, and I've had this discussion with you, I received a lot of phone calls and people praising it and people questioning it, and not necessarily complaining, but not understanding the rationale between one and not the other. So I think part of that has driven this, and I certainly contributed to this for sure. but Member Becerra's point is correct. So just as we didn't maybe, do everything before, and we only picked and chose some, I think we run into the same danger when we do something so comprehensive. And this was a lot of work, and I know it took a lot of staff time. So I am for this in the sense that I think the community was concerned that we were picking and choosing and not being fair to everyone. But I also think I kind of like the old way where we are all about actions. And
Your time is up.
thank you. All right. So with that said, the chair is going to invite a motion.
I move to adopt the observations calendar that's proposed by staff.
Thank you. So we have a first. Is there a second?
I have a substitute motion. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know, you want me to use substitution, but.
Yes.
Great. So my substitution is to consider including September 16th as part of this calendar.
And can you say the name of that again?
Yeah, so it's El Grito de Independencia.
Mexican Independence Day. All right. We have a first on a substitute. Is there a second? Hearing no second, the substitute motion dies. We're back to the main motion. Is there a second on the main motion?
I'd like to second it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yes, that's fine. We have a second on the main motion. Discussion on the pending motion, beginning with Mayor Pro Tem. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. I did what you did last week, Member Irving.
I understand Mayor Pro Tem's position regarding how we don't want to offend any particular person or group. But if adopting this, we do so and that is pointed out to us, we just course correct and move forward. But I think that the work that was put into this calendar, I think that it's a lot of thought was put into this calendar. And I like the fact that, it's anticipated, there's a form of recognition. I like the fact that it includes, all the different categories, just one post perhaps on social media. But I like this plan, so I'm in support of it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And Member Gomez.
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Harriman.
I'd just like to stick to the national holidays. I know a lot of work went into this, but I'm just, it's opening a can of worms. There's National Cupcake Day and you name it. So cookie, there's a national everything. So I would just like to stay like we have it pretty much in the past, maybe not in the last couple of years, but stick to the holidays, the national holidays.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm going to go ahead and jump on the bandwagon with Councilman Herman. This country celebrates Cinco de Mayo like it was its own national holiday, and they practically turned it into their own national holiday. That's not even on here. I have to agree with him. We are running into a slippery slope here if we voted in. That's all I have. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And so when I was on the school board, we did something like this, but it was for employee recognitions, like, Certified Teachers Month for our classified employees. And so that all went on consent calendar. I know the county of San Bernardino does something similar to this. I think that this is an important conversation. I probably am not going to vote for it as the motion stands. I might want to propose something different. But I do think that we should let our community drive this. With some exceptions, much like we did tonight. April is Fair Housing Month, and that came from a request from the community, and that works well. We've done it a number of times recently, and I think our part might just be in the way we set policy and our activities and our events. I mean, I think that speaks volumes. So that's all I have. And I'm going to go ahead and close the discussion period and ask Madam Clerk to take the vote.
Councilmember Gomez,
Yes.
Councilmember Harriman,
Pardon my, I'm not understanding, I'm not understanding what I'm voting for. That
Okay,
was
so-
stupid, but
Oh, do you want me to? repeat
yes,
the
please.
motion? Okay. So the motion is to adopt the observance calendar as it's posted on the agenda.
Okay, I vote no.
Thank you.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
No.
Mayor Jones.
No.
Motion fails.
All right, so is there any other proposed motion on this? I have one. So we've heard some discussion about including the national holidays. I think that's fair. So I would like to move that we have an observance calendar that includes our national holidays, recognitions for city employees, and that we make it, that we let me back this up. That we adopt the national holidays as stated on the observance calendar posted on the agenda. That we include the recognitions for professions within our city, the city of Victorville, and also that that we make a statement in our policy manual and how this council chooses to celebrate its diversity and inclusion. And that's through policy setting, events, activities, and programming, and that be communicated in our policy manual at the next update. Is there a second? Hearing no second, the motion dies. Is there any other proposal? Hearing no other proposal, we're going to move on to item number, no action was taken on that. We're going to move on to item number 12. This is the termination of local state of emergency relative to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I think effectively to follow suit, certainly with the action that the state of California has already taken and that the federal government will be taking relative to the original declaration of the emergency and then eventually the cessation of the emergency. We did declare a state of emergency, and at this point, we believe we're at a point where we can put an end to our local state of emergency. So with that, this item has been co-authored by myself and Sophie Smith, basically to satisfy the procedural requirement that there be a beginning and an end ultimately to the local state of emergency declaration. But also we have a brief presentation led by Deputy City Manager Smith to effectively speak to all that we experienced and attended to during this state of emergency. This was certainly one that I think is impossible to fully plan for, but I'm very proud of how we actually, as a city, got together and did everything we could to keep the city running and also meet the needs of our local residents. So with that, if you'll indulge me, we do have a brief presentation by Deputy City Manager Smith.
Good evening, Mayor Jones and Council. As we are moving to end our local emergency declaration, we wanted to take this time to reflect on the significant milestones from our city's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. There's a photo of our Emergency Operations Center. On March 17th of 2020, so just a little over 3 years ago, our city manager declared a local emergency due to the COVID-19 emergency that was forming. As government employees, all of our employees are considered disaster service workers. And so the following day, we started up our Emergency Operations Center. And then on March 21st of 2020, the City Council quickly ratified the emergency declaration, which really enabled us to start running an effective emergency response. Next slide, please. When we started the OC, we had to focus on what our actual goals were of running the Emergency Operations Center. And so quickly we established 3 primary goals. The first was to protect our community, our workforce, and our most vulnerable populations, including the homeless. Secondly, it was to increase our community's awareness of and the compliance with all the public health orders that started to come out. And thirdly, it was to assist our local businesses with their economic recovery throughout the emergency. As far as our employees, we took several measures. We started with enhanced cleaning and sanitizing protocols throughout all of our facilities that were carried out by our facilities staff. And then additionally, we were able to tap into the expertise of our EMS managers, Steve Casares and Mallory McPherson-Blas, to establish an internal Department of Infection Control, or what we call DICO. DICO was important because we relied on that team to help us enact safety protocols in city facilities, set up employee and visitor health screening procedures, establish COVID positive reporting protocols, which was required at the time by various agencies, to conduct internal contact tracing, and et cetera. So all of those efforts with DICO helped us to reduce our exposure among our workforce, and also to comply with all the strict reporting requirements that were starting to come down from various agencies, like Cal OSHA, for example. DICO actually continues to operate today because there are still ongoing Cal OSHA reporting requirements for outbreaks of COVID-19. We want to thank the DICO team. They took on a tremendous workload, and we're really grateful for their efforts in keeping the city team going. Next slide, please. As you can see here, one of our other focuses was to help our businesses understand all the different guidance that was coming out. If you'll recall, we were getting public health orders from the county. There were statewide public health orders. There was a lot of guidance coming out, and it was a pretty confusing time, to be honest. So we had to focus on making sure that our businesses and our residents knew what was being required. So our code enforcement teams, animal care and control, building, planning departments, they visited hundreds of our local businesses and posted information about what the current orders were, and they wanted just to make sure that the COVID-19 protocols were being followed that were in line with state and county rules. They also reached out to community members that were vulnerable, such as the homeless population and senior citizens, to just help them to connect with any assistance, information, food banks, any grant programs, etc. So when we closed our doors to the public during the first month of the pandemic, we were able to continue to provide high-level customer service because we had some strong online capabilities. We had recently, the year before, gone to an online permit system, so that really helped to continue our permit application and plan processing system. We had online bill pay, and we had online business and animal license renewals, so we were able to continue those services. We also developed, through the PIO's office, a strong communication platform that included a dedicated web page for all information related to the pandemic and resources, as well as social media posts. And we tried to get as much information as possible out to the businesses and residents. For the homeless population, we set up quarantine sites and actually hygiene stations to help them make sure they had the tools necessary to follow the guidelines, which was always constant washing of the hands and other cleaning procedures. So we did what we could as a city to set up those special stations for our homeless population. And they were set up at various points throughout another measure we took, and we were really grateful for the help of one of our nonprofit partners, the doctors from Simba Center. And Simba Center is one of the members of our Homeless Solutions Task Force. They jumped right in and they helped where we could not, in that they provided medical expertise to the homeless population. So they helped at our multiple homeless shelters throughout the city to establish safety protocols, intake procedures. They visited the shelters to perform wellness checks. They helped to perform COVID-19 tests, and they just provided that medical expertise that we could not as a city. So we appreciate them for their humanitarian efforts and for assisting us in an area to serve our homeless population. We also, throughout the pandemic, kept in close contact with our local hospitals. Many of them throughout the pandemic were concerned with facing surge and being above their capacity. It started to strain, the entire system. And at one point, we were actually asked by Victor Valley Global if we could help them to assemble a field treatment hospital outside of their facility. And we were very fortunate because, always seeking partnerships, we reached out and were able to get from the Marine Corps logistics base. And what you see in the picture is an Army tent that we were able to use and then start preparing for that surge and provide that field treatment hospital. We also made city facilities such as Hook Community Center and Green Tree Clubhouse available to the county to serve as both testing and vaccination sites throughout the pandemic. In response to the pandemic, we still wanted to provide customer service and be able to continue to have building activity continue. So we, through the creativity of our staff members, we established new inspection procedures, and that actually allowed for the use of technology. At one point, they were looking at things I can recall on their phones through Zoom. So they became very creative. And also at the city council level, if you recall, you adopted a policy that provided for extensions on plan reviews and permits so that we could keep construction alive during the pandemic. And because we were willing to adapt in terms of inspections, plan reviews, etc., single-family home permits actually increased 15% in 2020 over 2019, and there were 75% more commercial building permits issued in 2020 than we did in the prior year in 2019. So that was all during the first year of the pandemic. In terms of helping our small businesses and our struggling residents, the City Council voted to use federal dollars, and it was 2 HUD grants that we had received. So the first program, there was about $445,000 in federal CDBG dollars that we used, and we established the Small Business Assistance Grant Program. Those were the loans that were up to $15,000 to help small businesses continue their operations and retain employees throughout the pandemic. So with that program, we were actually able to assist 29 Victorville businesses. And then as far as outreach to our more vulnerable citizens, we partnered with our nonprofits, and the council approved an allocation of $121,000 to our residents to provide frontline services like food programs, rent, utility, housing assistance, etc. Additionally, and through ARPA funding, we were able to establish a utility bill assistance program. So there was approximately $1.4 million that was used to help nearly 2,000 customers who were unable to pay their utility bills during the pandemic due to COVID-19 related hardship. Next slide, please. But we also still needed to try to have some fun, to keep our sanity. We knew that our families needed safe alternatives because they were stuck at home and they could no longer participate in in-person sports and activities. So our recreation staff, our library staff started getting creative, and we offered some of those programs virtually. So some examples were online story time with the librarian. They hosted an at-home camp out. They hosted multiple online craft classes and many more via Zoom. Then we also had to pivot as far as our regular standing annual city events. So we had to be creative and start doing things in more of a drive-through format. So we started our first Hollow Boo drive-through, if you recall, which was a safe alternative to traditional trick-or-treating. And many of us will remember that the cars were driving through and we had gloves on and we had masks on, but we were still able to give the kids candy into their cars. So that was really good. It really helped us to continue to try to meet our goal of community engagement despite the pandemic. We also hosted 2 drive-through mask giveaways because of a large donation of masks that we received from one of our local companies, Everrank. So we pivoted to drive-through events during those years. As far as the airport, the pandemic significantly impacted the airline industry. And so we had many major airlines and our tenants who needed aircraft storage space. You may recall that we actually closed down one of our runways during the pandemic specifically to accommodate these requests. And at the height of the pandemic, we were actually storing upwards of 530 aircraft at the airport. The good side of that is it ended up in additional revenue for our airport during the pandemic. So another major priority was to make sure that we were protecting the financial health of our city throughout the pandemic. When we declared a local emergency, that made us eligible for financial assistance at the county, state, and federal levels. So to date, we've actually received approximately $41 million in grant monies related to the pandemic. About $20 million have been spent or encumbered in related expenses, and another $20 million is 21 is unencumbered, but it is budgeted. So altogether, with all of the emergency response, it was about $434,000 of city money that was not eligible for grant spending throughout this entire time. The rest of the response was funded with grant monies. So in closing, we just wanted, to mention that the pandemic tested us all. It's been over 3 years. It was the first time that we declared a local emergency and activated our Emergency Operations Center since the 1990s. For the first time ever, we were forced to close our facilities to the public due to the state of emergency for a short time. But throughout that time, we remained focused on our very important goals. Our employees dug really deep and took on additional responsibilities. We found new ways to connect with and bond with our community. We had to be creative. We used technology in new ways to offer critical services. And we still stayed focused on our larger strategic goals that had been set. Despite the added work, we were successful throughout the pandemic in advancing several initiatives such as Measure P, the Wellness Center, the construction of our skate park, plans for our green tree extension, etc. So on the behalf of the city's executive team, we'd like to express our gratitude to our great victims.
Madam Mayor, if I might just to close out with that, I need to recognize you all as a council. And I want to thank you all as a council, especially during that time. There was a lot of politicizing, there was a lot of opinions, a lot of polarizing during this period of time, whether the pandemic was real or not. And you as the council did not jump into the middle of any of that. You as a council relied on, you stayed focused on what mattered the most to us, which was complying with the laws as they were being imposed on us. And this council, and thank you to all of you for just staying focused on that. What are the laws and what do we got to comply with? Just you doing that allowed us as staff to be able to navigate this the way we did. made things tremendously clear, less confusing, and we wouldn't have accomplished any of what we accomplished without the support of this council, and especially being able to keep things less than confusing. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Metzler and Sophie Smith. Excellent presentation. Thank you. Madam Clerk, the recommendation, please.
That your Honorable City Council adopt Resolution number 23-024, terminating the state of emergency previously declared on March 17th, 2020, relative to the COVID-19 pandemic, and rescinding Resolution number 20-011.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, we're going to move on to technical questions for clarification as it relates to the staff report and certainly the presentation. I don't know how many questions we might have. I think we're going to end up more with comments once a motion is made. I'm sure there are plenty comments to be made for sure. That said, I'm going to begin with Member Irving.
I don't have any technical questions.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Metzler, and by the way, yes, Ms. Smith, very well put together. Now that this is terminating and the state is terminating COVID well, I guess COVID's been cured, but will Cal OSHA release their holds on our local businesses? Or no, that still stays in effect?
I think that is important to recognize, and that's why we effectively still have to keep our DICO in place, is Cal OSHA has not followed suit with the state and the governor's directive to effectively end the pandemic. So we still do have to comply with Cal OSHA regulations, and that's something that we're hoping gets addressed sometime here in the near future, because I think ultimately once they do, it'll really free us up from having to give attention to the compliance and getting us fully focused back on not just what we do here as city employees, but just a collective job space, just the industry that we have that makes the backbone of California work, getting us all back to work and focused. And we're going to look forward to that day, but we still do have to comply with Cal OSHA regulations.
So this goes hand in hand. Terminating this does not tie your hands to take care of our employees medically in relation to COVID.
We will still keep DICO in effect, and we still have the reporting requirements and the screening and so forth.
Okay, I hate to put you on the spot here, but here we go. With all the money that was given out and not given out, it was very well looked over. We gave out federal monies. Did we find any fraudulent askings, like EDD got frauded for millions of dollars? All kinds of people were able to get money from EDD. They just said, I'm not working, give me money. Did we find anybody through our programs, from utilities or our outreach program, did anybody come back that did not turn in the proper paperwork to prove they were necessary of this money?
There's no cases that I'm aware of. We administered, especially when we administered, it was largely on reimbursement basis. We did put a lot of diligence into we did create a lot of processes before we actually cut checks. So no, I'm not aware of any.
I don't want to get rid of you or anyone in finance, but maybe someone needs to work for EDD and have them find out. Thank you, sir. No further questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Gomez.
Yes. Will the resolution take effect immediately upon its adoption?
The answer is yes.
And could the city consider Cal OSHA's guideline as a deadline rather than placing that deadline to be tonight?
Certainly, that's within the prerogative of this council. If the council is desirous of that, we would certainly subscribe to that. But our current recommendation is to end the emergency order today, and then we'll just continue to comply with OSHA until OSHA decides they don't want to enforce any further.
Do we have a deadline for them to be able to make an end that we know of, or did we look into it?
None that I'm aware of.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez. Member Yaro.
I have no questions.
Thank you. And I have no questions, but I will have comments. All right, so with that said, the chair invites a motion from the council.
Motion to adopt staff's recommendation for termination.
Second.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. Moving on to discussion on that motion, beginning with Mayor Pro Tem. And this is, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but because this is the nature of this item, and we just had a presentation. This is if you have comments on the presentation, anything related to it, go ahead and do that now.
To our staff, I remember those days. Thank you for you guys, the directors, the managers. Thank you for everything you did for the employees and for the citizens to make this thing work. I don't think that's why we got too out of control, because staff and upper management stayed cool and collected at all time. You may not have felt it. You may, in your office, wanted to pull your hair out, but there's more white hairs now than there is in this picture, so I think it paid. Thank you. No further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Gomez.
None, thank you.
Thank you, Member Harrell.
My comment would be all that praise for the council. I wasn't on here. My seat was empty. That's all I have.
But you did support for sure. All right, Member Irving.
I'd just like to tell Ms. Smith that she did a wonderful job with the presentation. And I think I was on the council for part of the time, but in any case, I do want to say as a citizen, continuing the services and all the outstanding things that staff did during the time to help the community is very much appreciated. And I understand that it took a lot of hard work because I'm in the trenches too as a teacher. So I get it. And so thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Irving. So I do have a few comments. When COVID hit in early 2020, Member Gomez and I were the only ones on the council at the time. And I have to tell you, it seems like an eternity has passed since then, but it doesn't take much to remember some of the things that happened. And it was a scary time. There was so much unpredictability and unknowns and all of this throughout the whole country. But now the city is in a position that we have to make sure that our community is taken care of, and that we're doing everything to make sure that we're safe as well. And staff did a pristine job, and I know I have no doubt that staff did not sleep for months on end. And DICO was set up in to me, it looked like this had already been a well-oiled machine to me. It was very, very impressive. And I actually got to sit in on one of, my goodness, the original meetings. And sorry. And I remember thinking, wow, these professionals have really put their heads together. They brainstormed and they came up with brilliant ideas. They put contingencies in place that I would have never thought of. And for me, as a council member and a resident, it made me feel very proud to know that I was relying on people who were very savvy in this area and they knew what they were doing. I felt safe, and I knew that I could convey that to my neighbors, that we were doing everything in our power. In fact, Victorville's handling of all of this was so recognized throughout San Bernardino County that the county asked Victorville to present at its city county conference, its response to COVID-19. We were really, through all of that, we were looked as the real leader in the effort. And a lot of people looked to Victorville, and that is because of the hard work of our staff. So for me, all of the kudos really go to staff completely. I know that I just got to, hitch along and trust that I was being good information, and my trust was most certainly well placed. So thank you to the entire city staff. Those are days that we hope we never have to relive, but I know, heaven forbid, if it ever happens or anything like that, we have the team that's going to be a leader in all of it again. So many, many, many thanks. We have an incredible team. So now I'll close the discussion period, and Madam Clerk, will you please take the vote?
Councilmember Gomez,
No.
Councilmember Harriman,
Yes.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Yes.
Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 13 now. This is the consideration of proposed city council resolution number 23-025, adopting revisions to the City of Victorville City Council Policy and Procedures Manual. And so this was an item that I requested, and I'll ask Mr. Bortnowski to tee it up. And I don't know that I need to do any further introduction on it, but we'll see. Mr. Bortnowski.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. Yes, this is an item following up on the direction given at the March 21st meeting to basically tighten up the policy manual with respect to the conduct of closed sessions. And it's a very simple amendment to the policy manual that basically prohibits note-taking during the closed sessions, and it also then requires the return of any materials that might be distributed during closed session at the end of the closed session. The purpose of which is basically to ensure the confidentiality and the integrity of the closed session items and considerations. That I'd be glad to answer any questions. Again, it's a very simple amendment to the provisions of Chapter 5 that basically prohibits note-taking and requires the basically return of any materials that might be distributed as part of a closed session presentation.
Right. And so to introduce it a little bit further, the catalyst for this really is to make sure that this council is protecting the integrity of our confidentiality laws that we're beholden to under the Ralph M. Brown Act. I don't know what's happening to my voice, but we have a responsibility to our community, to city staff, to our employees to make sure that we are abiding by the laws. And in our last council meeting, we adopted a policy to make sure that video recording and so forth was held in certain areas, and also that there was no recording, etc., in closed session. Of course, that's not permitted, but we've tightened everything up so that we are making ourselves plain and transparent to our community with regard to our fidelity to our laws. And so with that said, Madam Clerk, will you kindly read the recommendation?
That the Honorable City Council review and consider the proposed revised City Council Policy and Procedure Manual and adopt resolution number 23-025.
All right, thank you. Moving on to technical questions for clarification as it relates to the staff report, beginning with Mayor Pro Tem.
No questions. Thank
Thank you. Member Gomez.
Yeah, how is the term notes defined?
It basically would require any note-taking by any member, either, well, we don't have electronic communication, so it would be the taking of any notes, any writings during the closed session would be prohibited.
And how will notes, and then again, it's probably the same thing, notes be constituted?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
So in other words, you define the word notes as writing?
It would be
not electronic.
Yeah, it would be writing information down relative to what was being discussed during the closed session.
So if someone decides to draw a circle with a happy face, that's still considered a note with writing, right?
That would not be a note. That would certainly be a writing, yes.
Okay, so for clarification, the term notes considers any kinds of shapes when there's a pen put to any kind of piece of writing, which would be considered prohibitive during closed session.
We prohibit notes and similar writings.
Okay, so is that a yes or a no when it comes to shapes or anything that could be construed, which includes shapes, any kind of diagonals, mathematic, anything with a pen to a piece of paper is my clarity.
If it could be construed as note-taking, yes, it would be prohibited.
Okay, so construed. So do we have something that would be casted upon? Because if you want to collect someone's notes, that would have to be given freely. I'm just trying to make it easy for
Right, we're not
anything that's
proposing
gonna happen.
collecting notes. We're proposing prohibiting the writings during closed session.
Okay, so for the record, for the clarity, the pen to the paper is constituted as a writing when there's ink that comes from it, and it could be and will be considered notes, according to my understanding of what you just kind of said a couple of times. And my next question is, if you know, what laws sustain the prohibition of this term, which I'm going to go back to notes, and what is meant by quote unquote similar writings with the context of the item that we're going to be approving, or
This is certainly consistent with the Brown Act. The Brown Act provides for confidentiality of closed sessions, so this is a way of ensuring that confidentiality is preserved.
thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez. Member Harriman.
I have no questions.
Thank you, Member Irving.
No questions.
And no, I know. I already asked you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah. I just went, yeah, I did.
By pen to paper, any type of writing item, whether it be a crayon. Some of us have that mentality, crayon, marker, pen, pencil, any writing item.
Sure. So let me, okay. So here are my questions. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. In fact, if you want to ask additional questions, you have time if you'd like to. Did you want to? Okay. So, Mr. DeBortnowski, so note taking, my understanding in the plain language of things is taking information that you've gotten from a source and putting information down about it.
Correct.
Okay. Other kind of writings can be doodling, correct?
Could be, yes.
Okay. And we're not talking about just pen to paper. It could be pencil, crayon, anything like that.
That'd be correct, yes.
Any kind of, okay. And so from time to time, staff has to pass out handouts during closed session. And so part of this policy would be to make sure that those are returned.
That's the second part of this, yes.
Correct. And part of the reason that we need to do this is we had a confession of sorts back in October that we had a council member that said that she had been taking notes in closed session for 6 years.
Yes, I've had information regarding the fact that people.
No different than we recorded.
Member Gomez has not been recognized by the chair and will suspend. All right, so.
Objection, bias, and prejudice.
Member Gomez has not been recognized by the chair. We do not have objections. This is not a court of law. We have points of order. Council member will yield herself to the policies and practices of Chapter 5 of the Victorville City Council. So, Mr. DeBortnowski, those are all of the questions that I have. And with that said, the chair is going to go ahead and make a motion to adopt staff's recommendation. Is there a second? Second. We have a first and a second. Mayor Pro Tem, any discussion?
No. Hopefully it's clear as day.
Thank you. Member Gomez?
No questions.
Or comments?
Oh, no comments.
Thank you. Member Harriman?
Yeah, I believe, in my opinion, anything notable would be notes. That's all. Anything notable.
Okay. Member Irving? Thank you. And the chair has no comments and closes the discussion period. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez,
No.
Councilmember Harriman,
Yes.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra, Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 14, City Manager reports. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. First, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our new fire chief, Mr. David Foster, coming to us from Village Fire District out in the Houston metro area. David comes to us with 40 years of experience, 20 as a fire chief. Prior to working at Village, I worked in DeKalb as a fire chief out there. Wealth of experience, going to be a huge value to us in building the department and leading the department into the future. So thank you, Chief, for being with us. We'll actually schedule his official swearing in at the next council meeting. In addition to that, we've got some events coming up. Spring Festival, our annual spring event, April 8th. That's this Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Hook Park. Be a lot of fun involving the kids. Kids Zone, carnival games, vendors, egg hunt as well. And we'll also have a bunny trail. And so a little bit of a charge for that one, $5 a kid. And so that's this Saturday. On the environmental program side, we have Again, our community cleanup day, it's that time of the year again. April 5th is the sign-up deadline. Volunteers are still needed for that, for the event that'll actually occur on April 22nd. So we're looking forward to that. On the building side of the house, a few development activities worth sharing with you. Project Loki, which is the Amazon warehouse, the 1.4 million square foot facility out at the airport is now complete. It was finalized as of March 29th. So good progress there. Sprouts, we do have tenant improvements ongoing for the Sprouts Market. Demo permit was approved. And their actual tenant improvement plans are currently in review. We briefly mentioned earlier McDonald's at the northwest corner of Bear Valley and 3rd. We also have a Chipotle and Jersey Mike's at the Crossroads Center on Palmdale and 395. Building shell on that is complete, and they're awaiting final inspections, likely this week. So I'll, as usual, forward the complete list of projects to you for those that you're tracking that I didn't mention tonight. You'll be able to thumb through the project list to kind of share with you where we're at on all projects citywide. That's all I have at this time, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Metzler. All right, item number 15, discussion and possible action regarding upcoming agenda items. Member Gomez.
Yes, for the sake of transparency and accountability, a motion merits to be placed to start recordings in all closed session items, all closed sessions, meetings to take effect immediately, no later, and to be agendized no later than when the budget review comes. I think it's in June 2023.
So action, discussion, possible action.
Yeah, and it include, those two items as well.
Okay, and recordings, you're talking about audio, video?
What we've done for several years when we had Angela Valles here.
We have not done that.
Yeah, we have. You just weren't aware of it.
And well, because actually we cannot, we're not going to do that, and I'll tell you why. It's out of order. The council years ago took action to, when I was on the council, to cease doing the recordings in closed session, and there was a deep analysis on that. So it would be inappropriate to reconsider that without the a motion to reconsider. So do you have anything else to offer?
No, that was it.
Thank you. All right, Member Harriman.
I have nothing.
Thank you, Member Irving.
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you. I'd like it put on the next city council meeting for discussion and action for any sitting city council member, whether it be in district or at large, that has not proved their residency.
To have an update on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. What would the action be? I mean,
That's up to the city council. If we can suspend that they no longer can sit behind the dais because they can't prove they live in Victorville, it's no different we did to Rita.
okay.
Discussion and action.
Mr. DeMornowski, are we good with that? I mean, that's a point.
Certainly we'd have discussion and action regarding it. It would, we have to look procedurally at how that would be accomplished, because there's usually a quo warranto proceeding that might be required. Depends on it. My understanding is the requirement or the request is to get update on or confirmation on council members' residencies, and then for the council to discuss what ramifications that would have if a council member is not a resident. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you do that in one meeting?
I'm not sure we can do the second part of that in one meeting.
Okay, so to the extent that we can, that would be the request.
Yes.
And then to the extent that we can, then there would be the second part of it at another meeting.
Right.
Is that fair?
That would be.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second that.
We have a first and a second. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez?
No.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
I have one more.
Yes.
I'd like to put on the next meetings also, council, one of our council members needs to be censored. Chapter 8, Section 3, number I. Apparently we have a council member that's Instacarting, Uber eating, free drop off food, whatever, but they're attaching the city of Victorville business card with a business logo on the food they deliver. They staple it.
You gotta prove that.
Okay,
It's called
so at
hearsay.
this moment, no. One moment, please.
You don't have to
The
say
chair
that.
is speaking right now.
Hearsay.
Member Gomez does not have the floor and is not recognized. Member Becerra had the floor and cannot be, all right. Yes, please.
So apparently we have a council member
But we don't want to go into too much detail, so.
that is stapling their city council card to food delivery.
Okay, so
Uber Eats has already been aware of it.
Mr. DeBortnowski, does this put us in censure mode or reprimand mode?
It could be either. Censure mode, there will be a due process, public hearing process that would be required. It may be simpler.
Maybe reprimand then. Thank you, sir. At least a on record reprimand.
Okay, and, well, so I'm just trying to understand. I know that when I've done this in the past, I put together all the information and presented it. Is that the council member's intention? Okay, all right, very good. We have a first. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, the vote, please.
Councilmember Gomez,
No.
Councilmember Harriman,
Yes.
Councilmember Irving,
Yes.
Mayor Protem Becerra,
Yes.
Mayor Jones.
Yes,
Motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
I'm done.
thank you. And so I have no requests. Moving on to item number 16, which is reports from council members. We're going to begin with Member Gomez.
Yes. So for the audience, and then I have my video recording over there, you could see the targeting. I asked for fiduciary bonds and oaths
Member
of
Gomez
office.
will speak to the council.
And so it's really interesting how they use their,
Member Gomez will stop speaking to the audience. This is a report to your colleagues.
I'm talking to my camera. Oh, you want me to face you to speak to
Member
you?
Gomez, your comments should be to your colleagues.
Do you want me to speak to you? Is it the way I'm like facing? You don't want me to face the audience?
It's the intent of the policy. So you can do that or we're going to move on.
Do you want me to face the audience or I don't, what is it you want me
Your
to do?
comments are a report to your colleagues about your activities.
Yeah, and
To your
I
colleagues, not to the
I
audience.
am reporting and I'm calling out people because they're calling me out. So if you say that's not relevant, I
Okay,
would
Member
understand.
Gomez is going to yield herself to the directives of the chair and yield herself to the policies. If you're going to continue to question, we're going to move on.
Well, I'm asking for clarification, so if you
Yes.
don't want to hear me, I've stopped. Thank you for acknowledging it.
That's not exactly what I said, but we will move on. Member Harriman.
I have nothing.
Thank you. Member Irving.
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Nothing.
Thank you. And the chair has a few comments. Last Tuesday, we had a special workshop entitled Governance Team Relations. And this, for some council members, is the first time, Member Harriman being our newest comer, and then 2 and 3 for others. And the purpose of that was to make sure that we understand our individual roles and responsibilities and our responsibilities to work together as a team to follow professional governance standards and what are best practices in governance. And why is that important? Because that's how we get the best work done for the city that we can. And so we all agreed to, as we have in the past, to follow norms and protocols. And part of that is to follow our policies and procedures and meeting decorum and conduct, certainly our code of conduct. So thank you to Baker Tilly for an outstanding workshop and the staff that helped put it together. Also want to ask that everyone keep our sister cities in their thoughts and prayers, as many cities local to us have suffered great damage as a result of the rain and snowstorms, and they have a lot of infrastructure issues to deal with, most certainly. And just as a hats off, I attended a mayor's meeting this morning, and the mayor of Big Bear Lake was present. They just had their strategic planning, and their consultant actually, because that council has adopted our policy and procedures manual, that consultant actually called out our council member conduct session as saying he had never seen anything like it before and that it was stellar. And so thank you to Mayor Putz that gave recognition to Victorville for that. That's another good thing that we're doing. And sometimes it's tedious to work on policy and procedures, but it really does have an effect that can be seen, you know, certainly in other cities. We're watched by cities across the state. And people are actually learning from us, which is a good thing. But just want you to know that kudos to our policy making in that regard, making sure that we're making our procedures explicit. So with that said, there's no further business before us. That concludes our business for the evening. And as a matter of housekeeping, the chair orders that all council members, staff, and audience members kindly vacate council chambers and city hall within 10 minutes. That's we'll say 8:25 p.m. so that these facilities may be cleaned and secured for the evening. Members of the public are not permitted behind the dais. This meeting's adjourned.